Welcome to Books versus Movies, the podcast where I try to answer the age-old question, is the book really always better than the movie? I'm Yuvia, an actress and book lover based out of the New York City area, and today we will be talking about Pachinko by Min Jin Lee and its 2022 adaptation, Pachinko, on Apple TV for this special episode of Book versus TV series. All right, let's get into it. So, Pachinko. I first read Pachinko, I want to say 2019, I think. And I picked it up again, and by this time, the TV series had premiered. So I'm really excited because I really love the book. And I thought the TV series was great in its own right. I will say there are a lot of changes between the book and the TV series, and we'll get into the details of that a little bit more, but let's go ahead and get started. So Pachinko by Min Jin Lee follows the story of Sunja. She is a sheltered daughter of a fisherman living in Korea, and after she unexpectedly falls pregnant, she marries a preacher, a sickly minister, I should say, and he takes her to Japan. She spends the rest of her life in Japan, and we get to see how her marriage and her pregnancy and subsequent marriage and everything affects her family through several generations. Pachinko, the miniseries, is based on Pachinko by Min Jin Lee, obviously, and it follows a Korean family across 4 generations, a Korean immigrant family in Japan across 4 generations as they leave their homeland and have to adjust to life in Japan. So yes, Sunja is definitely the protagonist of the book, I would say. We do get glimpses into other members of her family, but it all comes back to Sunja at the end. So we'll, for one chapter, spend time with one of her sons or with her grandsons, so we see how they're doing, but at the end, it always comes back to Sunja. In the film, in the TV series, it's definitely a lot more ensemble based. We get a lot of different focuses, not just on, it does all come back to Sunja, but I will say it feels a lot more ensemble focused as opposed to just focused on Sunja. So one of the biggest changes there are going to be a lot of changes between the book and the TV series. One of the biggest changes is that the book is told in chronological order. We start off with Sunja's grandparents very briefly, the birth of their son, Sunja's father, eventually his marriage, Sunja's birth, all the way up to Sunja as a very old woman in Japan. So it's told in chronological order. There's no time jumping whatsoever. The TV series is told exclusively in time jumps. So we start off with Sunja's little girl, and then we jump forward in time to see Solomon, her grandson, and then we jump back and get a little bit more of Sunja's backstory. We jump forward in time to what Solomon is up to. So I would say definitely for the first season, at least, the main focus is Sunja and Solomon, and then with a little bit of backstory for the other characters intertwined here and there. So I am going to be jumping around a lot because the TV series jumps around a lot, as I said, in time and everything. So one of the other big changes is that Kyunki, who is Sunja's sister-in-law, dies in the TV series. In the first episode, actually, we find out that she has cancer. Kyunki does not die in the book. I don't remember exactly how much, or I don't know if we're ever told how much older she is than Sunja, but she and Sunja are still living together in Japan at the end of the novel as very old women. They live together and they're each other's support system, essentially. So yes, Kyunki in the TV series dies of cancer, and it is this that prompts Sunja to return to Korea. Kyunki's final wish is to be laid to rest in Korea, so Sunja returns to Korea to scatter Kyunki's ashes in their homeland. And unfortunately, in the novel, Sunja never gets to return to Korea. Once she leaves Korea after she gets married, she lives lives in Japan for the rest of her life. Solomon is her grandson, and he works for a bank. The way he is fired from the bank is different in the novel and in the TV series. In the novel, they're trying to buy this piece of land. The bank is trying to buy this piece of land from this very old Korean woman that has lived on this land in Japan for decades, and she doesn't want to leave. She's a very old woman. She wants to live out the rest of her life there. And it's very much one of those things where she's like, I don't have much longer to live, so why don't you just let me live here? And Solomon finds one of his dad's friends. He talks to him, and his dad's friend is like, oh, I'll talk to her, and I based on what you're telling me, I think I have a mutual connection, and I have something I can connect with her, and I can convince her to sell the land. And he does. And after she signed the paperwork, the deal has gone through. She ends up dying like the next day. And even though it's not his fault at all, the bank is kind of like, well, it's gonna look bad because people are gonna think that we kind of scared her into selling her land and that caused her to die. So this is just gonna look really bad for the bank. And since you're the one that brokered the deal, we gotta fire you because we gotta protect our reputation. And so that's how Solomon is fired, which is like completely effed up, but not that the way he's fired in the TV series is any better, but it's more implied that he's fired, but it's one of those like, you're fired, you can't fire me, I quit kind of situations in the book. I mean, in the TV series. So in the TV series, he actually uses his grandma as leverage to talk to this old Korean woman and convince her to sell her land. And yeah, he it's a low blow. He uses his grandma to convince her to sell the land. And they get to the board meeting. She's about to sign it, and she's hesitating. She's hesitating really hard. It's obvious that she does not want to sell this land no matter what. And so finally, she looks at Solomon in the eye and says, be honest with me. If your grandma was on this side of the table and being told to sell her land, how would you honestly advise her? And he's looking at this woman, and he realizes that he can't convince her to sell. It's not sitting right in his soul. So he says, don't do it. Don't sell your land. And she says, all right. She gets up and walks out, and everyone at the bank is pissed. Obviously, they're like, how could you let this happen? You were supposed to convince her to sell. My job is on the line. You just ruined it, blah, 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 blah. And Solomon knows that he's going to get fired. So he just leaves, and he realizes that he's okay with his decision to leave. It's right in his conscience to have told that old woman not to sell her land. One of the big changes that I really, really appreciate about the TV series is how much time we get to explore the different characters. There are huge time gaps in the book. So for example, one chapter will take each chapter, instead of having like a chapter title, has a year, and that's the year that chapter takes place in. So sometimes you'll start off in 1 year, and then the next chapter will be like a 5-year time jump, and all of a sudden like the kids went from being a baby to being 6 years old or 7 years old or whatever. And so there's a lot of like information missing in that time gap, and I honestly don't feel like we miss it in the book, if I'm being honest. It's just so well written, and it's like just so sweeping and everything. I don't know. It's one of my favorite books. So you definitely don't feel the time jumps, or it is kind of jarring at first when you're getting used to it, but there's just so much more rich information in there that you don't necessarily miss, like what happened in those 5 years. And obviously, like Min Jin Lee, if she's not including it, that means that nothing worth happening in these characters' lives occurred, so she doesn't write about it. But in the film, in the TV series, we get a little bit more information for certain things. For example, when Sunja gets married and she goes to Japan, we see her in Korea. She gets married, and then we jump to her arriving in Japan. But the TV series has little moments like this where we see what happens to Sunja on that journey. So we actually see how difficult it is to say goodbye to her mom. She's only 17 years old, and she's crying because she's never left her mother behind before. She's moving in with her husband, who she's only known a few months. US. And again, 17, never known life outside Korea, and her little island in Korea that, she's never experienced life outside of that. And her mom has been her only companion for 17 years. And we see how hard it is for her to get on that boat and say goodbye to her mom. We also see how difficult it is on the journey. She's pregnant. She's not quite ready to give birth, but she's very far along. And so, she's got her big belly. She's on this boat. They don't really have like rooms on the boat. They're all kind of just down underneath the, I don't even know what it's called, but they're like down underneath like the boat area. I really don't know what it's called. Like where you would assume there would be like room and board, like down below deck. That's what I've been trying to say this whole time. There is none. Everyone's just kind of huddled together on this boat, and she's pregnant. She gets nauseous. It's just like a really awful journey for her. So I really like that there is this, we get these like little glimpses where we get to flesh out what happened in those gaps in between the years. So we see the difficult journey to Japan. We see, other little things like that, and get just a little bit more backstory on the characters, which really helps improve the story, I would say. One of the other big changes is Hana, who is the daughter of, there's just so many characters. I'm like trying to explain these changes. So Sunja has two sons, Noah and Mosasu. Mosasu has one son, Solomon. His wife and Solomon's mother died when Solomon was 3 years old. He never remarries, but he does have like this long-term girlfriend. So Hana is the daughter of this long-term girlfriend, and she is not likable at all. I don't like her, at least. And so her mother left, Hana's mother left Hana and her two brothers behind when she left her husband. She wanted to take her children with her, but her husband had a lot more power than her, and he basically said, you need to leave the children here with me or something very bad will happen. So she left her children behind, and like this man obviously does not want the children, like he doesn't. So yeah, Hana does not have a good relationship with either one of her parents. She feels abandoned by her mother, and her father just doesn't give her attention. At one point though, Hana does come to live with her mother, and Mosasu and Solomon, or with her mother. Mosasu and Etsuko don't live together, but that is how she meets Solomon. And she is a master manipulator. She is older than him, and she is Solomon's first sexual experience. And being a young teen boy, all he can think about is having sex with this girl, and she uses that to her advantage. But at one point in the TV series, well, actually, and then so I'll focus on the novel. In the novel, again, she's using her sexual advances of Solomon to her advantage, and essentially she's prostituting herself. Not that she would refer to it that, and not that Solomon would refer to it like that either. She wants to run away, and she just tells Solomon, like, I need money, and you're gonna pay me whatever you have. And so every time they have sex, Solomon brings her money. Sometimes it's his own, sometimes he steals from his father, but he finds ways to get the money to her. And once she has enough money, she follows through and she runs away, and no one knows where she is for years and years and years. In the TV series, that is not what happens. In the TV series, they are hanging out, and she convinces Solomon to steal something for her, and he's reluctant to do it, but she really wants him to, so he does, and he gets caught. And Mosasu at this point is like, you're getting way too influenced by this girl. The best thing for you to do is go to America and study over there. And he sends him off to the US as an international student. And after Solomon is sent to the US, that's when Hana runs away. So very, very different circumstances leading to Hana running away. Solomon does go to study in the US in the novel, but he only does so as a university student. He studies at Columbia, and while there he meets Phoebe, his girlfriend, and after he gets his job at the bank, he moves to Japan, and she moves with him, and she's very miserable there. She hates living there. There is no Phoebe in the TV series as of now. I don't know if they'll bring her in for the second season. I don't think they will, because as I said, the first season is definitely focusing on Sunja and Solomon, and it's hinted that the second season will focus on Noah. Another another change is that eventually they find Hana, and she is dying of what is implied to be HIV, and this is both in the novel and the TV series. And as Hana is dying, she tells Solomon, at this point he's already been fired from the bank, and he's like, I don't know what I'm gonna do, like I was fired, I don't know what to do with my life. And she's like, well, why don't you open a pachinko parlor like your father? That's what Mozazu does. He used to work at pachinko parlors, and he worked his way up to actually owning pachinko parlors, and that's what he does, and that's how he earns all his money, and it's a very lucrative business. So she says, why don't you go into the pachinko business? And he says, well, that's not, my father wouldn't approve. And she says, well, there are men who are not corrupt, who are in the pachinko business. Your father is one of them. I say you go into be a good man in the pachinko business and follow in your father's footsteps. And he says, you know what? I love you, Hana. We have another like Hana situation. So she says, sorry, someone tried to get into the studio. But yes, so Hana's the one that convinces him to go into pachinko. In the TV series, it's Mr. Yoshi who knows Mozasu. So yeah, that's how they start the pachinko business together. That's how Solomon decides to go into pachinko. In the TV series, Mr. Yoshi's like, be my partner and join pachinko with me. And in the novel, it's Hana as her last dying request. And because he's still in love with Hana after all these years, he decides to listen to her. So Sunja's husband is named Isaac. And Isaac is, as I said, a minister, and he does get arrested. This is Japan, and there is already a lot of distrust amongst the Japanese against the Koreans. And so in the book, Isaac gets arrested. Essentially, there is a police raid at the church, and actually, no, so they're supposed to essentially pledge their allegiance to the emperor. And in the book, one of the other ministers, I guess is what he is, they see him mouthing something that is not the allegiance to the emperor that they're supposed to be saying. He's actually praying, and this is seen as like, how dare you? You shouldn't be praying. You should be honoring the emperor, and we're going to arrest you and everyone involved with this church for not showing respect to the emperor. And that is how Isaac gets arrested. In the TV series, he's actually part of one of the groups that is planning a revolution against the Japanese government. So he's actually a part of the rebellion, but in the book, he is not. So yeah, there are a lot of changes, as you can see. This is very, very different. It's the same, but it's also very different. One of the things that I really liked on top of these little snippets we're getting about the characters, like backstories and everything, is that this is a part of history that we don't learn about here in the States, which is that Japan actually colonized Korea, and there was a lot of civil unrest in that area for many, many years. They colonized in like the early 1900s, like before World War I, and then they technically were no longer colonizing after World War II, just because they were no longer colonizing Korea, though that does not mean that there were not any lasting repercussions to Korea and Korean citizens living in Japan. So there was like just like these great episodes, namely second to last episode 7, if I'm not mistaken, that focuses specifically on Hansu. I haven't even mentioned Hansu. There are so many characters. So those are like the big changes, and then all the other changes are all, like I said, backstories into characters, and one of those characters that we really get a backstory into is Hansu. Hansu is Noah's father. He is Sunja's baby daddy, but they never end up getting married. But there is one episode, so in the novel, it talks about how Hansu has convinced everyone in Japan, really, that he himself is Japanese. If you are Korean, you know that he's Korean, but everyone from Japan thinks that he's Japanese. And so one of the episodes really focuses on how that possibly came to be. And yeah, it's one of the more difficult episodes to watch. It takes place right after a horrible earthquake that happened in Japan in the 20s. And that was definitely one of the episodes that was really eye-opening to see how Korean citizens were treated in Japan. And so yeah, there was a lot of like backstory like that I really liked that they changed and gave us more insight to. It is mentioned in the book, and obviously like that is a major factor for the characters and why they can or can't do certain things, why they want to do something to improve their lives but they can't, or why they, they're essentially arrested for treason when they weren't doing anything treasonous other than praying. So we get a lot more of that history and that backstory, and it really provides richness to all the characters and their backstories. And it's something that it was a change that I really liked. It was difficult to watch. Obviously, it's never easy to watch people facing any kind of injustices, but I think it definitely added to the story, just knowing, just really having these glimpses of how people were treated. As I said, it's never explicitly said in the novel, but there are hints of it as to why things like that are happening. So yeah, I really want to give a shout out to the opening credit sequence, because it just makes you feel so happy. Like, the song is so happy and all the actors are just dancing along. It is the most bizarre opening sequence because it does not fit with the rest, like with the tone of the TV series at all, but I absolutely love it. Like, this is one of those series where like you start the show and then the opening credits play and then the show continues. So it's just like this little burst of happiness where it's like, oh, this is gonna be a sad episode. Oh, I'm happy for like the 30 seconds this intro lasts, and then we're back to reality. So it's just like this little boost of serotonin that's really nice. So the opening credit sequence does not fit at all, but I love it. I absolutely love it. It's just great. So let's get into the ratings for now. I rated the book 4 stars. I rated it 4 stars the first time I read it. I continue to rate it 4 stars now. I absolutely love the book. It's absolutely fantastic. I love it. And I rate the TV series 4 stars as well. I cannot choose between the two. This is going to be another tie. And I'm sorry if people hate it when there's ties, but I can't choose between the two. The novel is just well written. It's a fairly thick book, not as long as I know this much is true, but it is a fairly thick book, but you don't notice it. It just reads so easily and you're just swept up in these characters so well. And I can't choose the TV series or the book over the other, just because like the TV series, while we do see moments that happen in the book happening in the TV series, we just get so much more insight into the characters and just that overall history that we're not familiar with. So it's really nice getting those little glimpses. So I personally cannot choose. I highly recommend them both. I will say that when I finished the TV series, I was not aware that there was going to be a second season. It definitely doesn't end it definitely doesn't end in a cliffhanger. Like, I will say it does end, had it not been picked up for a second season, like it does end. It does have an ending. I will say it's not a satisfying ending, because Sunja keeps mentioning like, oh, I thought I ruined Noah, and we don't get to see Noah except for the last 2 episodes, and even then it's just as a little boy. So it doesn't end in a cliffhanger, but it did end very unsatisfying until I found out there was going to be a second season, and I was like, okay, that all makes sense, because now they're going to expand on Noah's storyline in the second season. So one thing I really liked about the TV series as well is, I guess, because again, they didn't know if they were going to get picked up for a second season. It ends with Sunja selling kimchi next to the train station, which does happen in the novel. And that's the last image we see. So again, not a cliffhanger, just not satisfying, as we're getting hints and we don't know if we're going to get expanded on those hints that are being thrown in. But the series itself ends with various interviews from Korean women who have lived in Japan for most of their lives and the struggles they faced as Korean immigrants living in Japan. So that was, again, just building upon that history, which I really enjoyed. So yes, check them both out. Highly recommend them both. And thanks for tuning in. Next time, we will be talking about From Scratch by Tembi Locke, and its adaptation From Scratch, which is a miniseries. So we will have another book versus miniseries episode. Thank you. See you next time.